Yeah, I have to write it down. Good evening. We are going to tell you how to get a Linux terminal as fast as possible. Actually, depending on how fast you want it. So, this is it. You just open it. If you have a Linux box already, because you bought one from System 76, or Purism, what is it? I think the name. Or you, just making great jokes in the chat. I can't read them right now. If you have Linux, you might have Linux already, and you can just use it. Chances are you don't. However, if you have a Mac, you have a terminal. However, it is not a Linux terminal. It's not even a Bash terminal anymore. It's now a Z Shell terminal, which is not the default on every Linux system on planet Earth. So it's not the same thing. You can make it appear to be the same thing by installing all of those things if you have a Mac terminal, and you can look into how to do that. This is just an overview of what to do. Each one of these methods we'll go through as well. We'll do a video about that. So number one, REPL.it. So every single one of you can go out to Amjad's amazing website that he made. This is a guy who got famous on by making code.org pieces of it, the Python stuff, container system, and then he went on to do great things on the Webback team for Facebook, and then on the React team, and then he split off and started his own company called REPL.it, which is now REPL.com. And what else? He said to himself and his friends, and Amjad's a great guy. I've had some exchanges. I actually considered working there at one point. But now they're a big deal. They have lots of employees. They're funded. They got venture capital. They went through Y Combinator and all that jazz. So REPL.it, and we're not going to go through it in detail, but I wanted to show you this one. You can come to REPL.it, you can get your account, and you can click on New REPL, and you can go to Bash. Where is it? And you can click on Bash, create REPL, and you got your REPL right there, booting your thing, Echo Whole World. So this is also where you can do shell scripting. I kind of like that they use POSIX shell and not Bash, even though this is Bash. It's a Bash shell. It's kind of weird, and they run Bash on the console over here. So you can actually write Bash code over here, ls, pwd, sh main.sh. You got your terminal. Okay. So that is hands down the fastest way for you to get a Bash shell running. And you can actually embed your shell scripts and your REPLs inside of other gists and Medium blogs or whatever you want to do. I'm not a fan of Medium, but you can do that. So this is the fastest way to get it if you don't already have it on your computer. And that's pretty awesome. I mean, all things considered, that's pretty awesome. Any questions about that? No? Okay. It also has another 60 or 70 other languages if you want to try out those languages. So that's why I highly recommend you take a look at it. If you're an educator, a little caveat here, if you're an educator and you think that you're going to take your class of 40 people and have them all get on REPL.it because there's this great thing and they can do it on their Chromebooks, that is the reason REPL.it was created. Amjad's told me that directly, but make sure you have enough bandwidth at your school. I tried this and crashed and burned the first week and had to redo it all and have the kids install something else so we could work, because we could not do it with REPL.it. It was just not working. It requires a really, really active, fast, snappy internet connection. But it's available for everybody, and you can do it on a Chromebook. Hell, you can do it on an iPad. You can use REPL.it on an iPad, and people do a lot. Some people have really horrible experiences, as some are reporting. And it does have random problems. And that's the reason that I fundamentally do not recommend that. I'm telling you the ways, and I'll tell you the way that I recommend as we get on to this. So number two, and this is for Windows. If you have Windows, the fastest way to get a Bash shell and the easiest to do is to just install Git-Bash. And this was the standard way to do this for was it Git-SCM.org? Git-SCM.org. There it is. GetSCM.com. Okay, so GetSCM.com. Go out here, click on download. It'll say download for Windows. You can download the Windows version, and what this is a Bash interactive shell that was created for Git, the source management utility. That is fully functional and is a full Bash version, so you can use that for Bash. Now, it doesn't turn your Windows computer into Linux. That's something else that we're going to talk about next. But it makes your Windows computer act like Linux when you run it. So this is still the fastest way to get it. You click on an MSI installer, it downloads, you double click on the installation, you accept all the defaults, boom, you have Bash. And it's on your own computer. It'll work in the pub or in the airport when you don't have Wi-Fi. That's fast and easy to do, and it will get you a Linux Bash terminal experience. It's not Linux, but it's using the Linux terminal. This technically is Linux, even though you're running it through a web browser, right? All right, then the third way, any comments on that? This bugged out. Oh gosh. Is Git-Bash available at the Windows Store? I wasn't aware of that. That's something to look into. The warning is be sure to check off your chosen line endings. Not Linux directly. Yeah, use the Git related stuff. Yeah, when you go through installing Git, we're going to do that. We're going to install all of these things. Okay, so we're not going to get into the details of that, but there are some gotchas with Git-Bash that relate to being on Windows. Kind of like crossing the streams in Ghostbusters by putting, Bash on Windows. So you got to watch out for a few things, but we'll go through that. Still the fastest way to get Bash on Windows as far as I'm concerned. The way that's really popular right now and becoming super mainstream and powerful is to put WSL2 on Windows, which is the standard Windows thing to do. It's, however, has quite a few steps. They're trying to get it so that from the command line on Windows, you can type WSL2 -- install, but they don't have that yet. And there's a good chance that you're going to have to spend a lot of time wrestling with Windows versions and updating your patch level and running this PowerShell script. It's not easy, but it's very rewarding when you get it. This is my number one recommendation for anyone professionally using a Windows system that cannot be, rewiped and have Linux put on it. And that right here, this laptop I have right here from the company I work for, that's exactly what I do. And in every sense, after I put the Alacrity terminal on there, it is ripping. It's a ripping Linux. It's actually a Linux kernel running under emulation at the hardware level. It's called the hypervisor's container. We won't get into that. It's Linux. It's 100% Linux. There are some gotchas with regard to transferring files between Windows and WSL, but they're minor details that you can get through. The hardest barrier for this one is getting through the crap it takes to install it. You have to do lots of extra steps. There's a couple guides in here, and I have one too. If you follow them kind of by the letter and you don't really know what you're doing and you do it anyway, you'll usually end up with something that works. But this is the kind of thing that a beginner is not going to want to do. If you do the WSL2 method, grab somebody from Discord, from our community, stop by on a mentoring open time and just say, hey, I'm stuck on this one part. By the way, make sure you don't do it on your only computer. Make sure you have another computer running. It can't really hurt your computer per se. I've never had anybody say that it's broken their Windows machine. I've never had that happen. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. It just hasn't happened to me. But it's still a good idea to have another computer around to connect to the internet and ask questions so that you can get the thing back working the way you want it to if something goes wrong. So that's the WSL2. In fact, a lot of the solutions that we're getting into in these upper levels, that idea of having a computer that works, that's connected to the internet while you're working on your other computer is really important, because you need a reliable source of information when you get stuck. And you could even have our community up there in IRC or Discord saying, hey, I'm doing a live thing, and they can talk you through it. The fourth way used to be really popular in early 2000s and the 90s. Actually, early 2000s mostly. In the 90s, it was done from a CD. But in fact, the first one that I know of was a Unix distribution called Knoppix, which then went on to become Kali Linux. It was backdoor, and then it became Kali Linux. So you may have heard of that one. But the idea of booting Linux straight off of a thumb drive is still possible. It's still doable. It's also a good way to rescue a computer that is unbootable. This takes a tremendous amount of skill to set up. Most computers today will not boot from USB without a change to how the computer starts up. And that means messing with your BIOS. And your BIOS is the thing that the tiny operating system that runs to start your main operating system. It's usually got, Ameritrends or something. It's MSI, it's all red. It's this miniature operating system that came with your computer that's, programmed, burned onto the chip. And so you have to mess with that and figure out how to change your boot order. We may or may not be able to cover this here because, and testing it is really hard. But we can probably emulate it. So this is one of those things where you want to have help. You're going to have help to make the thing. You're going to have help to change your boot order. And then you're going to have to have help to know when to press the key at the right time to boot into the USB stick. And then you're going to need help knowing how to make that USB stick persistent, which means that you can save stuff onto the USB stick and then just walk away. But if you get that all working, it's very nice. I mean, you can take a little tiny USB stick if you want to be all Elliot Alderson about it. You can take like a little USB stick like this, right? And this little teeny tiny 64 gigabyte USB stick could have a very well packed Linux operating system entirely ready to boot at any moment from any computer. And yes, this is a technique that hackers have used for decades, if not longer, to get immediate access to and bypass security on systems, which is why so many systems today require disk encryption and things like that. And I know that's going down a rabbit hole, but if you want to be Elliot Alderson and you want to boot your Linux anywhere off of a USB stick, including a Mac, by the way, it's pretty damn fun. So that's something to consider. That might actually be harder than just installing Linux on a computer. So I don't know if it's fourth or sixth or whatever. Level 5 Docker containers. So if you don't, these days, everyone on planet Earth that's in technology needs to learn Docker. And that includes me. And I'm relatively new to Docker because of my time away from enterprise computing. But there is a lot of reasons to learn Docker, even if you are not, you don't think that you need it because you're not interested in it. Man, there's so many weird things in here. You can look. There's an entire Minecraft instance installed on Docker, Minecraft proxy, every one of these things. But you can go get, like, let's say Ubuntu, right? You can go get Ubuntu. There's an entire Ubuntu image. It's very tiny. My favorite image lately is Conan the container. And I'll do a whole video about it. Conan.io is so stinking cool. It is a version of, I believe, Ubuntu or Debian that is designed for building software. So you can have an entire powerful Linux distribution that just runs as an application on your computer, any computer, that has Docker on it, right? Mac, Linux, or without putting anything else on it except for Docker. And then you can run Docker and it will give you a terminal onto the thing that it remembers as long as it doesn't get deleted from your computer. And you can connect to it and run it. And in this case, I like it because I can build things in it. They have web servers that you can try out. It's a really, really great way to try out Linux. It's also completely harmless because it's all completely separated from your computer. So it's fantastic for doing like work projects. In fact, my best advice to a computer science teacher who's trying to build their own lab is to take the lab they already have and install Docker, and then install a few Docker images into these systems and allow the kids or the students to come in and to use those images and maybe name them for themselves so they can go in there and mess with them. If they want to snap them back and start all over, they can do that with no problem. Because containers, that's why. Containers allow all of that to happen. And we're not going to talk about containers right now, but just understand that this is a very, very powerful way. It's also a fantastic way to test a different Linux distribution. So if you want to see what this distro is going to do, you can install things and play around with them and then throw it away, or keep it, make a new image out of it if you want to, and then save it. So learning Docker is an essential skill. It's also a really fast way to get to a Linux terminal. In fact, I might be able to show you. Well, no, I told you I'm going to show you all these things one at a time in another video, because we're almost out of time. And then last but least, it's definitely not least, just install Linux. There are two ways to install Linux, actually, as a VM, a virtual machine, and then 7, I guess, the golden number 7, install Linux on your hardware, on your hardware. In other words, on was it bare metal? We'll call it bare metal hardware. And I'm going to put another note down here a little bit later. So a virtual machine is something like VS Code. So you go to VS Code. Not VS Code. What am I talking about? VMware or VirtualBox. VirtualBox. All right. So VirtualBox is this free software from a company that was consumed by Oracle, not Oracle. Oracle could not have made VirtualBox. They're too stupid. So the VirtualBox was made by a company that was bought out, and you can still use it, and you can download it, and you can put anything on there that you want. Now, just keep in mind, you may have a conflict in between WSL2 and VirtualBox, depending on where you're at with your computer. They've resolved those conflicts, but a lot of Windows computers still have conflicts between the two because WSL2 uses at some level the same technology as VirtualBox, and they conflict. No surprise there. So this VirtualBox will work on Mac, Linux. You can even, you can run it on Linux. You can also run it on Windows, of course. So there is another more mainstream version that's much higher quality, but very expensive, called VMware. And this is used by industries all over. If you're going to become a cybersecurity hacker, investing in VMware is a good thing to do, because you will be regularly breaking computers that are virtual in order to figure out how to hack them. In fact, it's required that you have a pretty hefty laptop to get the OSCP certification for exploit engineer or expert, whatever. Windows exploit expert, I think, is the one, and they require you to do this. So VMware is the other one. Those are the virtual machine technologies. We will be installing in one of those and showing you how to do that. I personally used to do this a lot. I don't do it at all anymore. It's way too slow. You can have a phenomenally good computer, and running a virtual machine with Linux on it is just abysmally slow to me compared to either WSL2, which runs on almost on bare metal, as close as you can get to bare metal, or just running it on bare metal, and that includes a USB stick. When you run it from a USB stick, it doesn't boot the other operating system; it boots Linux on the hardware, so it's wicked fast. And that's that. So, what else we got? And finally, I guess, is running Linux on. Kimu is the thing. People are in the chat are suggesting some other ways to run virtual machines on Linux, but this video is about how to get Linux on the terminal. And if you are using one of the Zen or Kimu, you already have Linux, so that's not relevant for this video. Number 7, if you want to install on bare metal hardware, And the easiest way to do this is, I promise you, if you look hard enough in the attic or you ask around, do we have any old computers that are not being used? Almost everybody can find a relatively usable old computer, sometimes as, far back as 2000, that will run Linux with flying colors, particularly with the terminal. So it's not going to be slow. In fact, it's really fun to breathe new life into an old computer that is struggling to run Windows or anything else because, they kept putting more stuff in it and bloating it, when in fact Linux lets you decide just how much to put on there. You can put a really tiny Linux distribution on a computer from 2000 or 2002 and it will fly like the wind, particularly when it comes to the terminal. So don't count out all of the old hardware. In fact, it's so fun. I'm in an apartment right now, but when I was in a place, I would collect old hardware from people that would donate it, and we would put Linux on there, and we would use that to help other people learn Linux. Sometimes we would give those machines to people who didn't have computers, who thought, and then they would become Linux experts and probably end up making 10 times more than the people who gave us a computer. So don't count out Linux. Install Linux on bare metal. Do not dual boot. And I should probably do a video all about that. It's a very controversial opinion. Do not dual boot. There is no need today. With containers and virtualization, you think you need to dual boot so that your screaming Windows machine can still play your favorite games, but you don't. You don't need anywhere near that performance for your Linux machine. You don't need it. You don't need it. And frankly, if you try it, there's a good chance you're going to screw up your gaming system. Mark my words, everyone has done it and will do it at some point. Every single different, because what's going to happen is you're going to start doing Linux, and then you're going to get excited and you're going to go out to the Linux porn Reddit page and you're going to see all the other Linux things you can do. And you're going to distro hop for 2 weeks and you're going to try all the different distros, and you're going to notice that those distros don't play well with one another in a dual boot, and boom, you're going to blow out your Windows partition. It happens every time, so many times. I just cannot tell you. Don't do it. Do not dual boot. Don't do it. If you do it, I'm going to say it when you blow yourself up. I don't want to hear it. Don't do it. Keep your Windows machine a Windows machine. You can, if you want a new killer Linux machine, spend $200 on some, used Dell of any kind, and you will have a kick butt Linux system. Okay. You don't, particularly for the terminal, you don't need all the fancy graphics and crap for that. You don't need it. You can have, if you want it, if you want to get a little bit heftier, you can get, animated windows and all that sort of thing. But it's not about your window manager. It's about the terminal. Okay. And that's what my recommendation is. So get Linux on bare metal. This has been a 20-minute video or so. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I've given you the warning about that. I did want to make one other mention of VS Code. A lot of people will tell me that doesn't VS Code give me a terminal? And the answer is no. The answer is no. VS Code gives you the terminal, a Linux terminal. It doesn't give you a Linux terminal. It gives you whatever terminal is on the system already. That means when you install VS Code, the terminal that pops open when you open it up is PowerShell, and PowerShell is not Linux. So it might be fine for some people, but it is not Linux. And I need to tell you that because a lot of people think that. In fact, when you go to use the terminal the first time, VS Code will still prompt you and say, would you like to install a real bash terminal? And it will, up until very recently, it will tell you, go download Git-Bash. And when you download Git-Bash, VS Code will see it, and it will set it, if you let it, as the default shell. And every time you open that terminal, you're getting Git-Bash. Now, these days, it'll also tell you, do you want WSL? And if it sees WSL on there, Windows, when it uses the terminal, it will pull that up. Okay, so those are the ways to get Linux terminal on your computer the fastest. Each one needs at least a 20 or 30, 40-minute video by itself. If you were trying to pick the method out of all of this, that's the best long-term solution. I believe that installing on bare metal is absolutely the best thing to do. It's going to take you a lot longer to do it. It's going to put off your satisfaction for using Linux for a while, but you will be better off in the long term for doing that. If you do not have that option and you're in a school environment or you're on a Chromebook, I would be REPL-ing it all the way, even though it's super annoying. If you're on Windows and you're not ready to commit, then the fastest solution is Git-Bash. Fastest and easiest solution I'd recommend is Git-Bash. If you are a little bit more Windows savvy and you're at the latest Windows version, maybe you're a Windows expert, WSL2. If you're a pen tester and a cybersecurity nut, go for the USB thumb drive thing. But this is going to require a lot of research and knowledge. The container stuff is fun, but it's not really a sustainable way for you to use Linux. You will be using that all the time after you learn Linux, but it's probably not the best way for you to get started. That's all I have for this video. I'm going to take some comments and from the gallery here and read what they have to say. I'm going to bring them in here and scroll back. All right, Tigo is taking care. He took off. Pop! OS. I run Pop! OS. Yes, I run Pop! OS as my distro because it's the easiest to install, and it's the most stable that I've dealt with. Pop! OS or Mint. Don't let anybody recommend that you use Arch as a beginner unless you want to go through a lot of unnecessary suffering that does not necessarily teach you Linux. It just makes you suffer. Arch is a fantastic distro, but I believe its relevance is lower than ever because it's not used in any job anywhere at all. So, every job that's out there right now is for something that's not Arch. So if you're going to learn it, learn something that's going to get you a job, not something that someone's going to say is cooler than something else. By the way, I used to think that Arch was really good for people who wanted to build, and I love the AUR, don't get me wrong, which is they have this big repository of software that anybody can contribute to, which is very, very dangerous and wonderful at the same time. CentOS is also good. CentOS has actually been disbanded, so I would recommend something from Red Hat besides CentOS. We need to do a video just on the distro all by itself, and that might be the next video after this. So we're going to close up now. We're going to have a little distro war video after this. So this is how to get this is like how to get Linux terminal. It's been an overview to kind of give you a sense of what's out there. It's not meant to give you the specifics. Obviously there's a lot of questions about distros coming up right now. So we will go back to those questions and we'll do those right now. I don't think putting Linux on USB is the easiest right now. No, not compared to downloading Git-Bash and hitting the installer. No, that's the easiest. Knoppix still have some just somewhere. Yep. WSL2 is using, remember, yes, it is. Don't link directly into the trap. 1 gig is a lot of RAM sometimes. Maybe. Oh boy. Back off, man. I'm a scientist. I have Bash. Install Bash for 10 seconds with the goodies. Windows Terminal plus Bash. Yeah. There you go. The Windows Store. You can install Windows from the Windows Store. What? Windows Bash? Get a CM? If there's a Windows Store offering for Bash, I'd love to hear about it. I've never used it. But Git-Bash I think is what is installed systems talking about bad experiences with REPL.it. And there you have it. That's my take on how to get a terminal as fast as possible. Arch Linux is for tinkerers who want to explore. So we're going to talk about distros right after this.